Hello and welcome to today's video. The end of 2023 is finally here, which does mean we'll be turning onto a new page, a new chapter of music with new releases going into 2024. So what better time to take a look back at some of the biggest and strongest releases from 2023 and take a look at how music shaped up over the last 12 months. But before we do get into our review of 2023, I do want to take a very quick moment just to thank anybody who's checked out my content over the past 12 months, whether you've liked or disliked a video, left a comment or subscribed. It is all very much appreciated. I've had a ton of fun talking about so much music over this year, and I'm very much looking forward to continuing to do so in 2024. But enough of that, let's get on to the real reason that you're here. And there is so much music I could talk about from this year, and because I listen to so many different genres, it would be cruel of me to try and do a top 10 list for the year. It just wouldn't work. There's too many genres and I'd be discrediting so many great artists and great albums that wouldn't make the top 10 because I'd have to mash a load together. So what I'm going to be doing is talking about 10 albums that really stood out to me this year, some that really just showed a lot of proficiency, some bands that really bounced back after a long hiatus and really proved that they've still got the great standards to produce some incredible albums. And we're going to do a bit of a countdown from 10 to 1, with number 1 being what I consider to be the most impactful album of this year that I've heard, that I've had on repeat pretty much non-stop. So without further ado, let's dive straight on in. Kicking things off at number 10, we do have Blur with the Ballad of Darren, the British rock band that really marked a very strong return following up from 2015's The Magic Whip, with an album that took you on a journey of reflection, and it was an aftershock of world's events. It was full of emotion and intention, and they really highlighted how the world had impacted them, especially over the global pandemic, and that's what we did see a lot of albums really focus on this year, or certainly take a lot of inspiration from, how the world had changed, how they'd grown from their experience, and Blur certainly showed that, especially Damon Albarn, who'd been a very busy man this year, not only releasing a Gorillaz album, but also working with Blur. But certainly the Blur album was the one that came out on top, as certainly being the stronger of the two, really showing just a lot of impactfulness in a lot of the tracks that did feature. You had songs such as Barbaric, you had St. Charles's Square, these songs that really just showed how they'd been impacted and how it affected their mentality, not just as a singular person, but as a band, and each member having their contributing factors to really pulling the album together to give it a very cathartic sound that really was showing that wealth of experience. For number 9, we do have Enter Shikari with A Kiss for the Whole World, what was arguably the band's most joyful record that they have ever produced. But despite that, they are a band that really kept their composure in their sound and continued to tackle very important issues. It's something they've always done. So looking at the environmental impact as well with this album, something they've done in the past with songs such as Arguing with Thermometers, and with this, it was again inspired by the pandemic. Ryan Reynolds wasn't able to write songs for close to 2 years because he was stuck inside, and he had this outpouring of just energy when they were able to begin touring again, get back to doing what they did best, and it really showed and came across very strongly on this album, continuing to emit those fanfare joyful sounds, especially on the opener A Kiss for the Whole World, really just showing that and just kind of bringing that back, those positive vibes, something that again they do so very well on a stage, and having some really interesting media to go alongside the album as well. Certainly on the album with the song Bloodshot, where they kind of had it filmed almost like it's meant to be watched on a phone, but talking about the impact of social media, so really putting a heavy focus on lots of different aspects that the band continue to do, whilst also showing a bit of a change up from their typical sound by going into something more joyful that really came across very strongly on this album. Then for number 8, we do have Depeche Mode with Memento Mori. It would be so difficult to avoid this album. It was great to see the band finally bounce back after what's been a very lacklustre 15 or so years. Many of their recent releases haven't lived up to the same standard that we have seen across the course of the 80s and 90s from what is arguably one of the biggest bands in the world, still continuing to tour, and the loss of Andy Fletcher really kind of hit them hard, and this is a real reflection on that. It takes a deep reflection into mortality, and it's an album that's certainly very much beautifully atmospheric. It really is showing the band bouncing back to their best, and many would argue it is probably the strongest album they have released over, say, the past 30 years. It really does make a strong case for that, and it really has that strong replayability by showing some of the elements that has made them one of the most iconic artists over the past 40 odd years, so that they have been producing music and putting out album after album after album. And it also was an album that included many of the typical elements that we do love to see, seeing the likes of Martin Martin Gore really step in with his Soul With Me, his kind of almost solo ballad that he loves to throw onto most of their albums. And it is unfortunately one of the bands who are most empowered by grief and things that they go through. We saw that in the 90s with Dave Gahan almost kind of passing away because of his drug use, and then came back to write an incredible album, and they've done the same with this, taken their grief, transformed it into something beautiful, and it really comes across very strongly with their most recent release. For number 7, we do have the Swedish garage rockers The Hives with the death of Randy Fitzsimmons, their first album in 11 years, and the death of the character that has always been part of their history and their discography. He was the made-up guy that was their manager, he did everything, he wrote the songs, and they've kind of put him behind and continued to move forward. But despite being their first album in 11 years, it still had that fun, frantic, and exceptionally silly sense of energy that really comes through. It's a song that really gets you on your feet, really having these short, quick bursts on some of these tracks that we did have, such as Trapdoor Solution and The Bomb, but they still showed some of their signature stylings and sounds, with Pear having this very in-your-face aggressive tone to him, really having these very interesting flowing guitars that really drive you along into the track. And despite that though, they really did continue to show how much deep meaning and consciousness is actually included in a lot of their tracks. You look at things such as Countdown to Shutdown, the idea that we're kind of collapsing on ourselves, and they actually include a lot more depth than many may see on the surface, because you're kind of grabbed in by that just fun, loving energy that really does come across. So when a band take a gap for 11 years, it's always a bit of a hit or miss. Are they going to come back really strong or really weak? And they certainly delivered in spades by putting their previous character to rest and can kind of move forward into the future. And hopefully if they're able to follow up more releases like this, it'll be certainly very strong to see the band make a comeback. And they've also taken inspiration from a lot of different artists, the likes of Arctic Monkeys, which did actually inspire one of the tracks on the album, What Did I Ever Do To You? They actually kind of toured with them and supported them around the time of this album's release, and they just really showed all the tricks that they do have in their playbook and put them all very strongly into this release. In at number 6, we do have Gunship with Unicorn, the third offering from the British synthwave trio, and this was an album that really just showed synthwave at its finest. They were one of the pioneers almost over in the UK for this particular genre. They've really brought synthwave to a much stronger position alongside a variety of other artists, especially over in the US, that are still showing this genre very strongly. And it's a neo-retro futuristic assault. That's the way the band described this album, and it pretty much hits the nail on the head. It's an album that is packed full of great collaborations, working alongside some big names such as Milky Way from Wargasm. You've got Tim Capello, you've got Tyler Bates, you've also got the likes of Charlie Simpson, the former Busted member and also one of the members of Fightstar, who the members of Gunship were actually previously in that band as well. So you see some great collaborations coming about to provide Tech Noir 2, the follow-up to Tech Noir from one of their previous albums, but they really just do put synthwave on the map. They really do bring this genre across very strongly by really building these strong soundscapes and really building a lot of messaging into the actual album as well. They were very inspired by old school retro games and lots of different things. I mean, even the actual opener in the form of Monster in Paradise had these ideas of vampirism and things like that, so very consciously written a lot of the songs in terms of their lyricism that really comes through, and they continue to show this strong world building with a lot of the sounds they did really pack in quite heavily into this album. Then at number 5, we do have another album that really showed some very strong world building, and that's nothing but Thieves and Welcome to the DCC, or Dead Club City. It was the band's first foray into a concept album, and they showed some brilliant execution on the storytelling and the scene setting for this. Certainly with the opener, Welcome to the DCC, it really built this picturesque world that was so beautiful, so utopian, and really set the scene for what would follow when the album was eventually released, which actually told the story of multiple groups of people, such as the house band that was living in the city, a couple that was going to the DCC to try and live out this perfect life, and then we get to the end of the album with Pop the Balloon, where you realise it's actually this dystopian, kind of almost nightmarish place that's kind of been sold as something utopian. So it kind of plays on a lot of these dystopian ideas that we do see in a lot of novels and things like that, and they were kind of took a lot of inspiration from many of these old novels such as 1984 and things like that to really power through and really show the story of this album, but did it in a very beautiful way, considering it was their first attempt at a concept album, and they pulled it off exquisitely. Then for number 4 we do have Animate with Heavener, and this is an album that really grabbed the progressive metalcore scene, really give it a good shaking, and we have seen over the course of this year a lot of bands really trying to push the boundaries on metal, trying to break it out from its kind of confines that we have seen it captured in over the years, and trying to expand people, the purists almost, and this is one of the albums that really helped to do that with its very progressive sound, because it's an exceptional exploration of grief and self-acceptance that the band really pulled off so very well, with lots of the musical stylings that they really showed, again bringing that progressive sound in so very cleverly. And it's also an album that's really set the band up for future success. Many people are really curious to see where they're going to go next, but certainly just showed a very strong standard with this release in their ability to just bring across so many different elements and explore so many different concepts and ideas that really made it stand out amongst the metal community as being one of the stronger releases of the year. Taking the bronze medal for me this year is Spanish Love Songs and No Joy. This was an album that I simply could not put down. I had this on repeat upon its release, and it really was just an album that really grabbed hold of me and would not let me go. And it really showed a lot of experimentation from the band. They've always played on the idea of self-depreciation, and with this they began to show a bit more experimentation. They started to contrast their positive upbeat sounds with their depressive lyricism, and despite it still having very negative connotations, the music makes you feel so happy. It's an album that you can really dance along to, despite the fact that it's so miserable at its core. But despite that, it still shows these small expressions of optimism, and it was a huge success for them to take what they'd done on Brave Faces Everyone, really try something a little bit different, try to put a more positive spin. It caught a lot of people off guard, me included, but it was a very welcome addition to their repertoire, and ability to really just kind of show a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, rather than just focusing purely on the darker days that lie ahead. So they really did kind of open themselves to a whole new future of different sounds, but certainly just really showed how they're able to continue developing their sound with this album. And it's one that really is very catchy. Some of the hooks on this really sink themselves into you, and you find yourself just singing along to the choruses without even realizing you're doing it sometimes. Coming up in second place for me this year has to be 100 Reasons and Glorious Sunset. They were one of the bands to revitalise rock in the early 2000s over in the UK with their album Ideas Above Our Station. They would have a couple of other strong showings as well, but their 2007 release Quick the Word, Sharp the Action certainly left the band a little blunt, and after that they would just they would never officially disband, but they would go on to do other things, work on other bands, produce for other artists as well, such as Boston Manor, and they've eventually managed to recoil themselves and come back, and they came back with a very heavy bang this year. They still showed some of their post-hardcore roots in their music on this album, but they also showed the wealth of experience and experimentation that they had developed, and this is an album packed full of depth as well. Colin Duran really takes a look at some of the life experiences he's had to deal with and really throws that into this album, and it almost feels like the final serving from this band that should have been released back in 2007. So if they decide not to release anything after this, it'll certainly serve as the perfect Glorious Sunset for the band, and really just kind of shows them doing what they do best, writing some almost post-hardcore inspired tracks, but also blending in some softer releases such as Replicate, which really did show their ability to interweave these different sounds and styles, and also carry some very heavy messages in their music. And finally we do reach our gold medal position, the album that stood out to me most across the course of this year. And I said when I did an initial review of this album it was going to be a serious contender for album of the year, and I still stand by that now. Sleep Token and Take Me Back to Eden, a thrilling conclusion to the trilogy of albums they have been releasing. And it's very interesting because upon its actual release a lot of critics were very undecided, because it's an album that packs so many genres, it throws them all into the blender. We've got pop, we've got R&B, we've got funk, we've got metal, we've got black gaze. They just have so much included on this album, and for many bands throwing so many different styles at one album just wouldn't quite fit, it wouldn't quite work. But for this band they really did just manage to pull it off. It's a beautiful album that's just so successfully weaves between these different sounds and styles, and continues to show the thrilling conclusion, the epic finale to this relationship between Sleep and Vessel, and the kind of of breaking between this deity and this follower, this shepherd and the sheep, and it really does have this strong crescendic build that really just shows the very fitting conclusion, and they did that so beautifully through the musical styles they did explore, and it did also include some very heavy messaging, but they didn't just solely focus it around the idea of just sleep and vessel. They made universal applications to a lot of their music, so you could apply these messages to everyday life, to relationships, to things like that. The idea of the financial world that we live in as well in some of the songs, looking at Aqua Regia that had references to gold and things like that. So much was packed into this album that you had to uncover, but on the surface for some it just seemed like it was a little bit too all over the place, but I think they really exquisitely pulled this album together, and it's no wonder that it actually did feature on many lists as being the strongest album of what's considered to be the best release of this year, despite the fact that critics didn't give it the most successful. They gave it mixed to positive ratings, but it really was just one of the standouts of 2023. So there we do have it, 10 albums that really stood out to me across the course of this year, and there were so many I wanted to include on this list. I really had to go through with a fine-tooth comb and kind of think which 10 have really just been the most impactful to me over this year, and there's so many that I could have still included. I mean, you've missed Paramore, you've got Queens of the Stone Age, you've got Sparks. There's so many albums I've been able to listen to that have been so powerful and so impactful, but these 10 really just for different reasons really stood out to me, just in whether it be the band bouncing back or whether it be the fact that they'd included so many different styles or some very deep lyrical content on these albums. They really did stand out as just seeing some very strong releases, and if you want to kind of see a deeper dive into some of these albums, I have covered them previously on the channel, so I will post links to those in the description of this video. But as always, I'd love to know your thoughts as well. So which 3 albums are your top 3 over the course of this year? Please feel free to let me know in the comment section below, and let me know why. What is it that stood out to you about those particular albums? Or if you don't want to do 3, just let me know your favourite and why. And like I say, I'd love to see maybe some albums that I've missed. There might be some that have really been very impressive that I've not had the chance to listen to, so be curious to check out some of your considerations as well. But I'm certainly looking forward to 2024 when we do get to see some great albums coming our way again. We've got some great singles towards the end of the year from a variety of different artists that have really lined up for some strong 2024 releases, but unfortunately we'll have to wait a little bit longer till we do get to hear them. So that will be everything for today's video, but as I said before, please feel free to let me know your top 1 or top 3 favourite albums of this year and why. Possibly give me some new other albums to check out that I missed over the course of 2023. Also, one other quick thank you to anyone that's tuned in over the course of this year. I'm very much looking forward to a ton of content coming your way as we do head into the new year.